The high level of uncertainty in the South African economy is beginning to have a noticeably negative effect on the rate of failure for small businesses. Given that government has earmarked the SME sector as a key driver of growth and employment, this is an ominous sign for South Africa's economic prospects and ultimately job creation. Joining us now to discuss how SME operators can stay afloat in these turbulent waters is Eyal Shaval. He is, of course, the head of the corporate sector at Global Credit Ratings. Eyal, thank you so much for joining us. Now, why is it becoming increasingly difficult for small and medium-sized enterprises to operate in South Africa?
Well, I think we're seeing the effect of the difficult market is really beginning to show in these small enterprises. I mean, previously from Global Credit Ratings perspective, we had seen a lot of growth and a lot of demand for credit ratings, which implies strong opportunities from the small and medium-sized sector, say 12 months ago, and even running into this year. But lately, we've beginning to see that growth in demand for new debt facilities is slowing down quite significantly. And most concerning is that some of these companies that we had rated are really falling on hard times and some have gone, I mean, even into business rescue and even into liquidation.
Given the fact that the government has set itself a target of creating about 5 million jobs in the next 10 years, how significant is this rate of failure? Is it enough to really push the unemployment figures far deeper into the red than they already are?
Well, I don't know if it's going to be far deeper, but I mean, these when we discuss SME business in global rating context, it's not your corner shop. These are businesses that are probably employing 100 to 1,000 people, even more than 1,000 sometimes. We're just differentiating them between the JSE listed, the big Aussie 100 type corporates. But these are big businesses, often in manufacturing, in agriculture, FMCG, so that with really big payrolls at the end of the day.
I think, Eyal, that's exactly my point of contention, because if we look at the number of jobs that have been projected by the government, a lot of this is actually on the back of small and medium-sized enterprises. And if we're saying that it is this very tier of business that is in trouble, should we be bracing ourselves for, the 25% unemployment rate to be looking much worse in the near future?
Yeah, I definitely think, it is an ominous sign of employment trends. A lot of the businesses we've dealt with are really businesses that have been growing quite strongly over the last 10 years and looking to take that next step in their business development to become from a largish, medium to large size business to become a large size business. And it is generally in these type of stages where they come and they're looking for a credit facility, maybe a 300, 500 million, even up to R1 billion credit facility, where they'll come to Global Ratings to get a credit rating. Now these businesses when we looked at them a year ago, even 2 years ago, they were looking quite strong and seemed to have the world at their feet in many cases. However, some of the transactions, and you could point to specific reasons why some of the transactions we've seen have either not happened or once they have happened, they've failed. Each one has their own specific factors. But I think the worrying thing is that normally, a business that has many divisions, so if one transaction doesn't pan out as the owners would have hoped, it's not the end of the world, and hopefully the other divisions will sustain that business and they will continue to grow.
So are you finding that the failure rate is higher amongst businesses that don't have a diversified offering and are really focused on one source of revenue?
No, it's not true. In fact, it's probably the opposite. It's some of the businesses that have now looked to grow and diversify the operations more and maybe moving away from core businesses into businesses that didn't understand as well.
Right.
And these transactions, and often these are entrepreneurs who have done this several times before within this business and built it from one operation to 2 to 3 to 5 to 10, and now looking for another large transaction. And when these transactions don't pan out as hoped, the pressure within all the other operations has really been pulling the business down also, and has not been, and therefore the business not been able to sustain losses in one in one operation.
So if we look at some of the internal pressures, one would think that small and medium-sized enterprises might then get onto the bandwagon of trying to expand outside of the South African market. Are you finding a trend that is showing that there is a pursuing of outside geographies, outside of South Africa by these businesses, or are they trying to just stay afloat in South Africa?
I think the key for some of these businesses is really to stay afloat in South Africa now. You can only really begin to look cross-border once your local operations are strong and producing sufficient cash flows and then you can look to expand. So it's the same thing that some of these businesses may have looked to expand into either neighboring country or to East Africa, where we've seen good opportunities which are there, but they don't necessarily understand the market as well. So the projections haven't panned out. Now, that, like I said, is not the end of the world if all the other businesses, if their corporations are strong.
Yeah.
However, because of the economic environment in South Africa at the moment, these corporations themselves have been struggling, and therefore the business can't generate the necessary cash to sustain either loss-making new operations.
Would you say that the government is doing enough at this present moment to curb this trend that we're seeing of increased failure rate in small and medium enterprises?
Look, I don't know what the government can really do. I think government does need to get their ducks in a row and make sure that the projects that are put out to tender happen on time, efficiently, that the money is well spent, that there is quality. And I think many of these businesses would rise to the party. When there's delays in either project timelines or there's delays in getting paid later, it's just adding to the pressure on small businesses. The big JSE listed companies, they've got the necessary liquidity to withstand a 6 months delay. It's not for them. However, small business just cannot, and especially in tough times, it's just adding to the pressure.
So what then now in terms of strategies that small and medium-sized enterprises should be looking at and should be deploying to stay afloat?
Well, I think ultimately the main strategy is that a small businesses should focus on their core operations.
Right.
Now, from a job creation perspective, that's not ideal, because you want these businesses to follow the entrepreneurial spirit and to go out and to start new businesses which will ultimately create new jobs and economic growth. That's what everybody is rooting for. But ultimately, the core has to ensure that your operations are running profitably and with sufficient liquidity. Because if the core is weak, then the whole business is at risk, not just growth opportunities.
I think one of the conundrums that I face with this discussion is that if we look at the Global Competitiveness Report that measures the ease of doing business, we see that South Africa has been improving over time. Why is this not translating into a conducive environment for small and medium-sized enterprises too?
I think there's good points to that, and there's negative side to that there is much of what you point out has helped these businesses grow over the last 10 years. However, they remain quite fragile. Small businesses are inherently fragile, and therefore they need the overall economy to be growing to just help pull them along even through tougher times, while their products are gaining market traction, while they trying to pay off large debt facilities perhaps, or equipment finance. So they really do need a lot of help from the general economy, and if that's not happening, then the negatives will tend to offset the positive impacts.